Sinuous.
Back off the street. Back off the street.
Sinuous.
Fire. Back off the street.
Yeah. This album consists of a bunch of tracks that didn't make it to official releases, and still dope enough to wanna put it on repeat quick. So peep this, throw us in your CD player. Oh, I forgot they non-existent, dog. Shit has changed major. So scratch that, throw it in your iPod player. Like, my God, he right hard, a ball on you fake. Sure they throw back, so give it away for free. Like, oh boy, go and make noise when you hear. Hope you jump for joy. I'm optimistic, glass ain't half empty, it's half full. Hopefully by now you know me from the Jazz Council, that was years ago. So I brought more fire to douse stools and playing by house rules. I lay back like a couch dude. I'm that dude to make his own beats, writes his own rhymes, records his own shit. Probably why it takes so much time to put out an album. Man, I'm always behind schedule. Ain't that I ain't hungry, I just always got my plate full. Try to digest all the topics that I'm spitting. You need to sit back and actually take the time to listen. We living in a new age where mind states are feeble. Kids' attention spans are shorter than Danny DeVito. My beast though, be banging, be about my business. Bass stays knocking like a Jehovah Witness. Leave them scattering with cheddar in the gang of rhyme patterns. I ain't worth challenging. You all need some aspirin. Aspiring to be me, no empires to feed. Just a chosen few that's flowing through. Firing up the weed. Jesus, crazy what the world coming to. I'm here to live it, make music. For y'all is just hanging on a gimmick, huh? Wait a minute, man. Don't get me confused with none of these newbie ass rappers, man. I know the game be feeling fucked up, but I've been making beats since 95, regardless if I had the right promotion or not. Word up. Hey yo, I ain't always humble, I ain't always intense. I've had my good and bad days like anyone else, more or less. Probably a lot more than less, or the more of it in a sense. Feel blessed, so I just move forward through the stress. But don't smoke stress, smoke the bombest weed you ever seen. Cannabis club category, certified Cali green. Type of bomb that I keep up in my sack. They give a lot of cats anxiety attacks. There's no denying the facts, but enough about the weed though. I keep it on a need to know basis. It's time for me to cut to the chase quick. So download the free LP, spread it to your friends and family, even to the little haters mad at me. I got 2 official LPs coming after these. So far I'm grateful for the love that's coming back to me. Truly appreciate the support, especially my peeps that have my back.
What is going on, folks? Happy Wednesday. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to Wartime Optimism something or another. Today we're going to be looking at Photoshop actions. It's going to be cool. I feel like Photoshop actions don't get the credit they deserve. I use them kind of all the time. They're not like the end-all, be-all, fix everything up type of solution that some, asset sellers would make them believe. I've seen some like photographers selling Photoshop actions to give you this effect or that effect, and those are of varying difficulty or varying effectiveness. I find them really useful, really for efficiency in post. And so we're gonna hop right on in, and we are going to go over how I use them, or like the types of things that I use them for, and how I make them. I'm sure that some of you already know this. Maybe there's something new for some of you guys. For those of you who haven't used them, hopefully this will be a good introduction. Let's get started. Let's see, where'd that one go? There we go. Okay. You guys should be able to see Photoshop. I changed the resolution of my screen so that I hope you can kind of see the menus, or at least more so than you would otherwise. Milan, Daniel, Luis, glad to have you all here. Luis, I'm gonna go with Luis. Luis seems like it should have an O in it and should be American. So I'm gonna go with Luis. Yeah, Daniel, there's a whole bunch of stuff with Photoshop actions that, I say make your own. That's my belief. And hopefully this will help you guys do that. Let's see, can I go full screen on this and kind of make this up here? Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so, let's see. I actually wrote out some notes for this one, guys, so that I did things in a sensical order. Hey, yo. Luis, Mexican, fantastic. How are things going down there these days? How are you guys dealing with everything? Hopefully better than us up your northern neighbors. Vlad, what's going on, buddy? Good to see you. Okay, so you guys have seen me use actions before, especially for like efficiency. Like I have an action, and actually we'll run it to get started. This is one of the product shots I made way back when I was with Kitbash for their Warzone 2, their Aftermath kit, basically the sequel to Warzone. And this was the raw render. Like there's a lot of atmosphere, it's a little bit flat and everything else. And then I have this thing just from back when I used it called Warzone 2 package, however you want to call that. And if I run it, it starts going through all of these steps, right? For anyone who hasn't used it before, an action before, it's just basically doing things in a systematic way. It's kind of like a macro, right? So it's taking all of these steps that I used a while ago for one image and just reapplying them all in the same order and with the same settings. Oh wait, Luis, you're in LA? Are you Luis from Luxagon in LA? Let me know. If so, I think we met like very, very briefly at ASAI last September. It's so weird putting names and faces together. If that is you. You could be someone else entirely. I have no clue. Or Luis a Kilograph. Ah, Luis. Yes. I feel bad for not having realized that a long, long time ago. My apologies, buddy. But as always, thank you for being here. I'm glad to hear that you guys are still working remotely, because that's how we should go. Yeah, we had burgers and a beer, and it was fantastic, and we talked about all kinds of nonsense. As you can see, I am terrible with names. Always have been, probably always will be. But hey, Luis, so glad to know who's joining me now. Okay, so while I, embarrassed myself a little bit there, Photoshop actually did some work. So we had this image, and without doing anything besides pressing play, we came out with this image, right? And we got some like noise that's added in. There's some like bloom, obviously some color correction, all of these things, and it just played them the same way I did them. This kit was, I don't know, 9 months ago, 10 months ago, something like that. And here's all the steps. And so we're going to go into specifically like why I would use it for like an entire color correction towards the end. But one of like the very basic things that I do a lot, is there's like, we went over Nick color effects, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, something like that. And there's like these two filters that I use almost every time. Almost every time I make an image, at least if it's not a painting. And here's basically what I do. And I do this over and over and over and over and over again. Which is, I open up Color Effects Pro. I click on this preset that I made ages ago, and I say okay, and then I wait for it. And I wait for it. The color effects, I really wish that they were faster. But so then I sit here and I wait for this to finish. Okay, and then I usually dial it down to something like 40-50%, depending on the image. And then I make another image, and then, or another merged layer, and then I go back into Color Effects Pro and I run this other filter. And yes, if you're thinking, why don't you just put them together? I totally should, but I like to balance them differently for each image. And so then I run this filter, and then I wait again. And I wait again, and I wait again. Wait. And then I dial that one back, and then we get something like that. So those two filters, doing a decent amount of work. And then maybe after that we'll go through, let's say like, we'll adjust some curves, and then we'll make one last one, and let's say that this was like the finished image, and then I go through and I usually add noise through Analog Effects Pro. I think that its film grain looks better than regular old Gaussian blur noise, or Gaussian noise. And so I go in, and then I have to wait for all of these things to load, which is like dot, 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 dot. Analog Effects Pro is even slower than Color Effects Pro, and then I have to turn off this, and then I have to turn off this, and then turn off this, and then turn off this, and then turn off all of this, and then I have to go down, and I have to adjust this to the number that I like, which is usually like 490-ish, something like that. Depends on the size of the image and how clean the image is and how noisy you want it to be and everything else, and then we have to turn that off all the way, and then we say okay again, and then it's finished. But then I forgot to sharpen, so then I need to go back to this guy, sharpen this guy, say okay, go back to Analog Effects Pro. I promise you I am getting somewhere with all of this nonsense, that it should make sense, and then I have to wait for this to happen all over again, and then I have to go back in here and then turn off all of these things again, and turn this off, and then go back to my grain per pixel, and get it set to somewhere around 490, something like that, and then I say okay again, and then we're done again. And I haven't really done anything, but it took me like a bunch of time, and I had to be here the whole time for it. Easier way to do that. I have an action that goes through and does exactly, this one does it in 2 steps because I don't always do noise right away. But without pressing anything, it's going to give me a bev adjustment, which is the first filter that we saw, and a decorsha adjustment, which is the second adjustment we saw, and it's going to basically not necessarily prompt me, but it's going to turn one off so that I can adjust them then in the order that I want them adjusted. The nice thing about doing things this way is that, one, if you want to get up and grab a cup of coffee, you can do that, and your computer can still be doing things. You need to write an email, any of that kind of stuff. So like, it's going to go and it's going to set it automatically to 42%. This one is going to set it to like 16, which is kind of close to where I want it to be. And then I have another script that I've just called Grain 488, or Action, technically an action, which I can just play, and it goes ahead and it puts just grain onto the image, none of the other stuff, so that if I do it and I say, oh shit, I forgot to sharpen it, we just go back and then we run it again, and we did everything that we did before, and it took like a fraction of the time, and there wasn't any risk of messing things up or doing things and not realizing it, and it makes it super, super simple. So that's how I use it like most of the time, and we're gonna go into how I created all of these, but that's like the main thing that I use it for, is like things that I do over and over and over again, or things that I want to do the same way every single time. It's easier to set up an action, way easier. A couple other use cases before we get into how I use these. I think I see this out. Here we go. Here's our sketches from what's it called? The last painting that we did that I still haven't gotten around to posting yet. Oleg, what's going on, man? Good to see you here. So you guys know that I'm a big fan of flipping the canvas. But there are 2 times when flipping the canvas is a pain in the ass. One is if you're doing thumbnails, because if you're in here sitting here drawing like this, and then you want to flip just this guy, and you flip the whole thing, then you got to do this, and then you got to scroll back to where you were, and it's a whole giant mess. But the other thing is that if you have a giant like 16-bit file that has a ton of layers and everything else, flipping the entire thing tends to take a bit of time. So for this one, I have another one set up to just flip that layer. Now, this one's super duper easy, super duper simple. I don't know of any, like, by default, we have flip canvas horizontal, and you can see I have that set to F11 because that's what I've always had it set to. Don't know why. I don't think that there is like a set command in keyboard shortcuts anywhere that allows you to set flip canvas horizontal. And so making it is super duper easy. So we'll make this one first because it's a good kind of introduction. So we'll say horizontal test. And so we just, in the actions panel, which obviously you can get to from window actions if you don't have it available. And then you just say, you know, create a new one with the little plus icon, give it a name that makes some sense. Otherwise, you will never be able to find it again. And then you can see that by default, as soon as you start a new action, the little red dot for record is active. And so we have the layer that we want to transform. We just say Control T for transform, right click, flip horizontal, enter, and that's all that it takes, right? And now if we play this action again, horizontal test, it just flips that layer back and forth, right? Nothing super fancy, not anything hard to do, right? Like it's only a couple of keystrokes, but I use it all of the time. So if it saves me a couple of seconds and keeps me in like the creative zone, then it's probably worth it. And it's a good example for how to make these. And then you can assign functions to these things. So like you can only assign F keys. You can't assign any shortcuts to actions, which is worth keeping in mind. But that's another one that you guys have seen me use all of the time in conjunction with flipping the whole thing. And it's super duper handy. Now, let's get into some more real world stuff and some work stuff. Now that we have an idea of how to kind of make an action, which is, you know, like I said, pretty straightforward. We're gonna get to some of like the ways that they go wrong in a minute. This is an image I made a while ago for Jean Nouvel's MoMA Tower. And one of the things that is super duper annoying is that, okay, here's the image and it's pretty much done. But let's say we wanted to tweak the color of the chair a little bit. Well, I need to grab a selection for the fabric of the chair. So I need to go down into my render elements and then I need to find which one. Okay, so this one's the chair and then I need to select the blue and then I need to go back and then I need to unisolate and then I need to go all the way back up. Bada bing, bada boom. And then we can make a adjustment for the chair. Right? We can make it more saturated. Milan, thank you for that. We will move it up so that we can see things. I'm glad you're keeping me on your toes, and I don't know why can't I hear any music anymore. Very strange. Where did OBS go? Okay. We will pull it down so that I can see it as much as possible. Okay. So the obvious answer to doing this is to have these selections stored in channels, which is why you render out a RGB multi-matte in the first place. So what we could have done is let's delete that adjustment layer. Let's go all the way down here. That's where the rendering started. So what we can do is that, you know, when we start one of these things is that we can go through and we can duplicate channel, say okay, right click, duplicate channel, say okay, select, right click, duplicate channel, say okay. Okay, that's one of them. And then we can go back to this one and we can do it. It's tedious and it's annoying. And if you're not sure whether or not you're going to use them, at least in my experience, for me, I end up not doing it, and then I go through the whole project, going through that first process until like the end. I'm like, okay, let's actually put them into channels, and then it's, you know, I've already wasted a ton of time, and there's nothing worse than wasting time for no reason. So instead, I'm going to copy these. Instead of doing things that way, I can select, as long as it's the topmost layer, I have this other one here. Action, which press play, and then I got two more to go. Press play, press play. It deletes the layer at the end of it, but then all of my individual layer mats all ready to roll. Right? So in like a real world situation, delete group only. If I'm all the way up here and I want to, you know, actually adjust that color of the chair, all I need to do is click on my channels tab. There's the one, you can see it, grab it, and just like that, we have, you know, a selection for the chair. Super duper simple. And the way to make that is exactly the same way. We'll do another, because you couldn't see everything, and I feel like going through these things twice is always helpful. I am going to go and I will make that one over again as well, because it's super duper easy. So let's turn off all of these layers. So we'll go back to our actions window, go down to the bottom somewhere, and we'll say, click on the little plus icon. We'll say RGB test, RGB matte test. And then you can see, now you guys can see this time, that we have a little red recording window. And so all we're gonna do is we're gonna go up to channels, and we're going to right click on the first one, say duplicate channel, say okay. We're gonna select the green channel, duplicate channel, say okay. We're just gonna do basically the task of one of them and say okay. And then if you want to delete that layer, just delete that layer, and then you say stop, so that it's no longer recording what you do. And now this, as quick as that, we have a little script that goes through and makes all of our channels. And you can see it's just adding them on to the bottom at this point. So super easy to make, and it's one of those things that, you know, depending on your project, you might only have one of those. You might only have, you might have up like I've seen as many as like 5, 6, 7 of them. And being able to quickly put them into channels means that A, you're going to do that, which means your entire photoshopping experience is going to be smoother and more efficient. And the less time you waste scrolling around and looking for the right mat, the better off you will be. So hopefully that makes sense. Those are the types of things that I use it for. Let's get into... I'm looking at my little list here. Oh yeah, let's do one other thing that I do all the time. We're not going to make this one because it's super simple. But let's say that you are working... Where did my channels go? There we go. Let's say that you are, you know, exporting something for a different 3D software or like a game engine or something like that. You have all these beautiful normal maps, but they are all OpenGL as opposed to DirectX. And so to do that, right, it's one of those things that's like, it's a super simple process to flip between DirectX and OpenGL. All you gotta do is go into channels, click on the green layer, invert the green layer, go back to the RGB, and then you can see, voila, we've gone from OpenGL to DirectX, and then we just save it. Simple enough, super duper simple. But if you have 50 normal maps you need to do that for, that's a waste of a half an hour. As opposed to that, I have a little script for when I was doing a whole lot of this type of thing, and I'm just gonna turn off the save and close, that just flips that channel. Super simple. And so if we close this, we can go File, Automate Batch, and Invert Green. It's always gonna have the last option that, the last action that you used, I believe, is what it always defaults to. It's gonna say choose a folder. So we're gonna go to the normal folder, which has all of those images in it that we just looked at, all of the normal maps. And we're gonna say none, because I have save and close in the options. We're gonna get into that in a moment. And then if I just say okay, it's gonna boop, ba-doop, ba-doop. It's gonna go through and do all 4 of them. It's, you know, it loads them. I wish you could turn off the GUI for it. GUI? Yeah. Graphical user interface. I don't know why I blanked on that, but we can see here that it's gone through and it's switched them all. All right, super duper quick, and it's nice to be able to say like, okay, I have to do 50 of those. I'm gonna hit that. I'm gonna go make coffee, go see the baby, see the wife, just stretch my legs, stand up, all of that kind of stuff. And then we can switch them all back just as easily. It keeps out all the things the same, and we'll be back to where we were. Okay, so Sarkat, before and after for what? And Clark and Milan, good to see you guys. Luis, yeah, I don't use crypto mats. I just use standard multi mats, but they're basically the same thing. Anything that's giving you an RGB mat, they're amazing. They give you super clean selections. Those like clown maps that print everything in a different color, you end up with all kinds of haloing if you adjust anything heavily. The aliasing changes, especially if you have depth of field, it's a nightmare. RGB mats of one form or another are the way to go for selections for clean photorealistic work. Okay, so they're efficient, they're consistent. What was the next thing I was going to do? Let's see here. Okay, so for this guy, so this is the script that we currently have running, or is this? No, this is a different one. Let's run that script one more time. So this is the packaging script. I'm going to let it run so that we can look at it and figure out what to do next. Because I lost my train of thought and I didn't leave a lot of notes. Oh, yes. So, for this one, I have, like, what we're watching right here, basically, I made, I don't know, 20 of these images for the product, for the packaging shots for this kit. And the whole idea is that you want them to look consistent, right? So they're all rendered with the same light, and they all have the, kind of same tone mapping and everything else applied in render, so that they all come out looking pretty much the same. And then, but not that great, right? Like, this looks a lot cooler, at least to me, than this does. But by having this as an action that does the same thing to each step, you can basically color correct one of them, and then you just set batch to do all of the rest, and then you just get to walk away and have a coffee or whatever else, and come back. So it's great for stuff like this. Whenever I do like product shots for like graphic designers where they want to see packaging of a design lockup that they're working on or anything like that, and there's tends to be these long swaths of images where we're doing like 20 or 30 images, and the whole idea is that you want them very consistent from one to the next. You don't want one to be a little bit more warm and one to be a little bit cooler and one a little bit sharper or more contrasty or anything like that. And so as long as you've lit them all the same way, just set up an action, bada bing, bada boom, it all ends the same. And a lot of times what I'll do also for professional, like standard ArcViz stuff, is it won't be like a singular script necessarily that edits the entire image, but it will be like the end part of the edit, right? Like the color grade and, like contrast, and if I put any kind of like LUT or blurs or blooms or filters or any of that kind of stuff, I'll just do one this way, and then every time I get to like the end of editing an image, I'll run that, and then everything kind of comes out looking the same, which is always a good thing. The same as inconsistent, right? In color, tone, temperature, all of that kind of stuff. So let's make one of these, because there's a couple of things that you should keep in mind while doing it, and a couple like little nifty hints and tricks. Now, one of the reasons that these take kind of a while to run is that they're running like three NIC filters, 2 color effects, 1 analog effects pro, a topaz simplify filter. Then they're all kind of slow. So we're gonna do just like a quick edit that does the same thing. Most plugins, if you use them, when you run an action, it'll save all of those things. So let's make one. Let's say we wanted to go with make this into like a sickly green color or something like that. I have an idea. So let's go down here and let's go create another new action, and let's call it sickly green. Why not? And so let's let's go ahead and copy this, and we're gonna set this. Let's get this kind of, I'm thinking we want it to kind of glow a little bit. So you can see if you watch over here on the right, as I make these changes, you're gonna see that this keeps editing, right? Like it's just keeping track of everything that I do. And there are some rules that I'll probably break so that we can see why they don't work. So okay, so let's add a hue of saturation. Let's just really kind of like, yeah, I'm thinking like real green. All right, let's go with something like that. Let's turn that down a little bit, and then maybe we want like the highlights to take on a little bit of a yellowish color. So we can do a blend if and say if anything's lower, we'll go with something like this. And then we'll turn that down a little bit. Dun, dun, dun. All right, and now, what else should we do? Let's add maybe a color balance. Why not? And then let's take the shadows and maybe we put some blues in there. And midtones, let's bring those greens back, and then highlights, let's put some, what I'm doing doesn't matter. How I'm doing it does matter. And then let's add a curves layer down here, something like this. Okay, so we have our sickly green. So now if we wanted to go back to this, we could just click it and it just quickly makes it, right? So that's really nice. But let's look. So one of the things that you always kind of have to be mindful of is that I did a copy at the beginning of this. Which is like, just like, let's give an example of why that wouldn't work. So let's say that we took this and before we did a whole bunch of adjustments to this guy, let's say, and we went really dark with it. Then we tried to bring it back with like screening the whole thing, and maybe we need to go and take this guy and brighten it, something like that. And then we looked at this and we said, okay, let's see what's going to happen if we run our sickly green. Let's see what that does to this guy, and let's like turn this down a little bit. There we go. And so now if we run sickly green, we're going to run into an issue, which is that when it copied it at the beginning, it copied this layer, and what we wanted to do is copy merged. But at the very beginning, whoopsies, delete. At the very beginning, it doesn't let you copy merged on a background layer, which I think is the dumbest thing in the world. And it also doesn't let you like Control-Alt-Shift-E. Doesn't do anything because that uses the copy merged function. But then if we go up and we have something like this, right? Even if we have a simple curves adjustment here, if we run sickly green now, the version that it copied was blank because we started it on a curves layer. So there's all these little things that kind of go wrong in this situation. And I don't know if I explained that well, but if you guys have played with copy and copy merged a lot, you know what I'm talking about. I think that Photoshop does that really poorly. So what we can do is that if we want to be able to use this script anywhere, there's a couple of things, there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. One is that even though we're done recording this, we can go and we can redo some things. So if we click on the record thing again, and let's say we're just going to make a new curves layer, and we're going to name it dummy. and we are going to take the opacity down to 0. We're going to mark it red so that we know that everything is a mistake. And then over top of that, we're going to do a copy, Control Shift C, Control Shift V, which is more reliable than Control Alt Shift E when it comes to actions. So if you're using this type of method the way that I use it, Control Shift C, Control Shift V is the way to go. And then let's go back to our actions and stop. So I don't know how to get them to slide. They'll slide in kind of wherever you start, except for the beginning. But that's okay. We know what we did. We made an adjustment layer, and then we went to paste. And that's basically, these are the steps that we need here. We are just going to drag them up to the very top of this. Right, and because that has a paste, we can get rid of set selection, copy and paste, because we don't need them anymore. So we're going to delete those steps out, delete that selection, and now, if we had a curves adjustment here at the beginning of some sort, if we run this script again, if this worked, fingers crossed, above this curves layer, we're going to have that dummy layer, and then we're going to have another copy of basically the edited background. Okay, so it worked. And it'll also, now because we have a dummy, even though copy merge doesn't work on background, because it makes that dummy first, you always know that you're going to have that kind of blank layer in there. I feel like that was not as clear as I wanted to be, but let me know if it made sense. You run into a lot of errors. If we turn off, here's the thing that you're going to see if this is a mistake. Make adjustment layers. Let's go ahead and turn off these little check marks. Whenever you see like an action that has a red check mark next to it, it means that you have some of the actions, the steps turned off. So I turned off like the dummy adjustment layer, and you're gonna see here that it's going to Adobe Photoshop, the command copy merged is not currently available. Because we only have a background layer, there's nothing to merge. I don't know why it can't figure out that obviously you want to copy in that situation. And so then you just run into issues with the script working. I make that mistake all of the time. The other thing that happens quite frequently, let's create a new one and we'll just call this tests, is you'll be going and like, let's say we wanted to go back for that green look or whatever else, and let's say we wanted to go green, something like that again. Maybe not that big, and then let's say we were going to make another one. We're going to go like, let's say we were thinking kind of oranges for the highlights, blah 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 blah. All right, and then you're like, oh, that green looks like shit. Oh, excuse me. So let's go back and adjust it to like a bluish color. That's kind of cool. And then let's go back to that and press F2, and then doesn't really matter what you do here. Now this, I don't know if this is gonna work or not on just a background layer. It's really hit and miss when you start selecting specific layers. It may work here. It does work here, but let's say that we had already made like a couple of adjustments to this guy, and then we wanted to run it again here, boop-a-da-boo, then you run into issues because it's looking for that layer based off of name. So basically, whenever you're making an action, if you're trying to do something like this, where you can edit a lot of images all at once, try to do it in a way where you're never selecting layers manually. You're just kind of constantly working upwards. Otherwise, you run into this issue. Same thing with like painting. Painting, it won't record. Gradients, it will, but it'll depend. There's a lot of ways that things go wrong really quickly. So basically, I try not to make any adjustments besides opacity, blend modes, blurs, that kind of stuff that are just being applied to the layer as a whole. What else do I have? So let's go back and let's say, so I grabbed like 4 of these little previews that I made for this. Let's make a copy of this folder. So it's just called Aftermath copy. And let's say that we wanted to make all of them that sickly green color. We would go back to automate, we go to batch. It's gonna ask for the folder. We're gonna choose the folder, Aftermath copy, select folder, and we want it to run that and then save it and close it, right? So we say, okay, that all looks good. We're gonna run into a problem, which is that the first time it comes up, because this is no longer a single layer, it can't save it as a JPEG. Okay, so let's cancel that. Let's stop that. Let's go back to our sickly green preset, and we're just gonna go down to the bottom, and we're gonna go to the last current step. We're gonna say record again. We're gonna say Control-Shift-E, which is gonna merge visible. So now that's something that can be saved as a JPEG. Okay, fantastic. And then we're gonna say no to saving that, and we're gonna say file. Let's go back, scripts. Automate, batch. And sickly green, we still have that selected. We're gonna say okay again, and we run into this issue, which is that it wants to know what kind of JPEG quality you want to save. Okay, stop that. Let's close this again. And what we need to do now, we need to open this guy back up. Bada bing. So right now, if we run this right through, it comes down, it gets to this, and then if we say save and don't change anything in the name, nope, that's not what I wanted to do. No, cancel. We need to press record down again at the bottom of our sickly green. Control save. Oh, that's not what was supposed to happen. Well, let's see what, I was expecting the JPEG thing to come up. Well, let's see what happens if we run the script now. Automate, batch, everything's still set. Save and close, say okay. Ah, there we go. I'm surprised it didn't ask, and I'm not sure why. Maybe because I had saved, I don't know. Anyway, so now if we look in this layer, we can see that we've changed everything to green. Word of warning, which is when you go to automate and you go to batch, you get all of these options for override actions, save as commands, which is really confusing because it does the opposite. You can pick a folder for things to save into, and then you can say like, oh, let's give it a final or something, change the name of it. It's really, really, really unreliable. Sometimes it'll save over, it won't save the version you want, but it'll save over the version you want to keep. Sometimes I have not figured out a reliable way that I can do it and not mess anything up. So I, generally speaking, just leave it as all inside of the script itself or inside of the action. And then just like I did before, which was that make a folder with a copy of all of the images you want to adjust. Is the best way that I have found to make sure that you're not ruining the originals. Everything else in there, just ignore it. It doesn't work. If you guys find a good way for it to work, go for it. 2 other things in this whole idea. Let's turn off save for a moment, which we're just doing by unchecking it inside of the actions panel. Let's close that, and let's go with file. If you're doing this and you want to check everything before it saves, or whatever it might be, if you go to destination none, right, and just run it again, it's going to run the script, and it's just going to leave it open with all of the layers. So if you wanted to go through, I should have turned off merged visible as well, but we can just undo one for each of these. So we can go through and say like, oh, I want to tone this back for this one before I save it. This one feels like it needs a little contrast, so I can go in and add it. Just be mindful if you're doing this on a ton of high resolution images that you go into, if you do it that way, you can run into like RAM issues, right? Because if you're loading 32-bit EXRs to do this, blah, 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 blah. Self-explanatory, but this can leave it open. Similarly, let's not save these. Let's go back to one of these guys. Let's just grab our green kind of test file out here. You can also, if there's like a certain thing that you want to be able to adjust while it's running the script, you can do that. So let's make a new script, and we'll call this one new action. Keep saying script, and we'll call this green adjust. So let's say you decide that, okay, this guy needs to be like, this one at least needs to be a little bit brighter. But when you were looking at all of the green versions, oh, we don't have green versions. We'll have green versions. Some of them were a little bit too light. Some of them were a little bit too dark, whatever. Let's say you want to do that, and let's say you forgot to sharpen. So let's sharpen things, and let's make one like big adjustment just so that we can see and prove that it's been done. Let's add orange. Not everywhere. Let's do it like just into the mid there. Something like that. Okay. And let's say you just wanted to do that and you wanted to save. And so we're just going to do all that. We're going to say save, and we're going to stop this guy. Now, next to the check mark, you have this little kind of menu option. And if we just run this script again, and tell me if I'm missing a bunch in the chat. I'll check up in 1 second. So if I run this script again, because this one guy's got a little adjustment, green adjust, when it gets to that curves layer, it's going to ask me to adjust. It's going to make the adjustment that I made initially, but it's going to give me the opportunity to change it. And then I can say, okay, and it's going to play through the rest of the script. So let me show you how or why that is really nice. Scripts. Oh, I messed that up pretty much every single time. Let's run sickly green again because I got rid of it. And aftermath copy, say okay. Bop, bop, bop. Oh, and I turned off save too, didn't I? That's okay. So we're saving this manually. And look, even just like pressing Control, Save, and Enter, it takes time. This stuff's annoying. You have better things to be doing. Okay, so we can see that like this guy's a little bit too dark. That guy could be a little bit bright in the highlights, but the blacks are okay. Blah, 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 blah. If we go back and we go to automate and we go to batch and then we run that green adjustment that we made, and we just use the same folder, which is the green folder, and we can say save and close, and we say okay. So like for this one, I actually want to pull the blacks down and maybe lift them a little bit, right? So it's not quite so contrasty. And then we can say okay, and it's going to go through, run, save, close, do all of that kind of stuff. Like this one, I think looks pretty good like it is. We can say okay, it's going to do the other stuff, go through and clean things up. This one, I actually like the blacks kind of coming down a bit, but I don't like all of that contrast up in the highlights. All right, so we can do this. Okay, that kind of gets the contrast back to where I want it. Say okay. bada bing. This is a, you know, the same problem as before. We have these like super dark highlights. Maybe something like that's a little bit better. And bring that down somewhere like there. It doesn't really matter. And then it goes through and saves it, and now we have all of those changes made, and the only thing that we had to do was adjust the actual curves as it was going along. And where was that file? Reset aftermath copy. And then it still made like that orange change at the end, right? So like just to kind of prove that it went through and made all of the changes all the way through. So that's a super helpful little tool. I had to recently go through and make like a whole bunch of previews for HDR images. And so I have just this little tiny script that all it does, I keep saying script, and that's why I always go to the wrong thing. Guthrie, quick exposure save. So all it does is it opens an HDR file, brings up the exposure adjustment, but gives me a chance to like visually get it so that it looks right on a screen. And then it reduces it down to a reasonable size JPEG, changes it to 8-bit, crop or canvas size cropped off the bottom half so I could only see the sky part that mattered, so I didn't have all the black at the bottom. Changed it to 8-bit, changed it to a reasonable size, saved it and closed it, so that I could go through and do like 100 of them, and it took me like 3 minutes as opposed to, I don't know, an hour or two. So yeah. What else did I miss anything? Juan. Have I used that batch method in animations? I actually have used that batch method in animations. It is not efficient. Obviously, like, you know, running these actions for like 2,000 frames, Photoshop's not designed to do that. But particularly with some of like the kitbash animation stuff that I did, I actually saved one because I had a feeling someone might ask that question. So like for this kit, the steampunk kit, which I think should have a link to it. No, it doesn't have a kit. I had already made all of the product shots for this thing, so I already had like a lighting and a grade and a look and all of the changes that I liked in Photoshop as an action. Once this whole thing rendered out, I was like, okay, well, I could recreate that in DaVinci or Premiere or whatever else it might be, but that's going to take time, and at the end of the day, I'm just trying to get it to look like the product shots that I already have an action for, and everything was rendered in the same like day and light. And so I just set it to batch all, whatever it is, 2,000 frames, and I went to bed, or I went out and had a beer, and when I came back, it was done. Not the most efficient way, but in that case, because I didn't have to do anything besides press run and walk away, it was definitely faster than like resetting that up in After Effects or Premiere or Resolve. But just depending on what you're doing, remember that it can be a very slow process. And then if you want to edit anything, if you're not sure that it's going to look good, you have to wait however long it takes to batch all of those frames. And then if you want to edit it, you have to basically restart that whole process. So it's not the best method, but there are times when it's super helpful. Okay. I think I'm going to go through, I'm just trying to remember if there's anything. I'll bring up something to look at. Beautiful orange and yellow. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to make sure that I specified. Copy folder, run-on folder, yep. No, I think that covered everything. But let me catch up in the chat stuff because guys, I've not been doing good. And if you're ever like trying to get my attention whilst I am talking, if you throw in an @Droki in there, it comes up like bright orange for me, and I'm more likely to notice it. Bunch of talk about crypto mats. I'm not even going to get into that today because I thought this was going to take like 15 minutes, and like we're pushing an hour, baby. But let's see. Selecting things behind glass. I haven't used crypto mats, but obviously with multi-mats there are ways around that depending on your renderer. I think that's it. Ian, my actions are not available online, and to be honest, they wouldn't help you that much. One, they're using like my plugins, and they're using like settings that are not or saved elsewhere. But two, a lot of them are just like the little things of how I like to work. I don't have anything that's like, this will make an image look like this, right? Like the only reason this image looks like this now is because of the image that it started from, right? And so I don't have any actions that I think would be like useful that wouldn't just take you 20 seconds to remake yourself. And then this kind of stuff, you know, I very much encourage you to go and kind of find your own. I do think it's really, really helpful to have them. One other thing that I'm going to pull up before we are done is that stressed. Remember the image that we made in an hour? This guy. And check this out. Oh, here we go. So you can see it's labeled Dark Fantasy. So when I got to this point in this image, and I don't remember if I did this afterwards or if I did this while we were live, but I got to this point, I'm like, oh, this has like the same kind of images and tonality that I used with the Dark Fantasy images, just from memory. And so literally when you play it, it does kind of the same thing we did before, right? Like a couple different blend layers, and then a couple different filters and all of that kind of stuff. And then it goes to that, and it's just like no effort, right? And sometimes it looks good, and sometimes it looks like shit. But my point being is that I think that it's helpful to do these for yourself. They're not hard to do as far as from a technical standpoint, but they will be more helpful if they're based off of your images to begin with, because it's how you like to edit something, and it's based off of how you tend to render something, right? Like any of the presets that I kind of frequently go back to are taking into account that I made the image in the first place, and so like my tendencies for color and contrast and lighting are already kind of like baked in, so to speak, if that makes sense, to like the either the LUT that I use, a lot of LUTs that I use or make when I'm rendering, or these types of actions. So yeah, play with them and make your own. And it's also, the more that you do, the better you'll get at doing it, and you'll start seeing all of these places where you can like, oh, I do these like 3 steps in a row every single time. Like if at the end of an image, let's say at the end of every one of your images, right, we all have our little things that we use when we're finishing. You can just, before you do it the next time, just say finishing, right? And you might want to give it a file size, right? Because how much sharpening you want to use is usually based off of how big the image is. You know what I'm talking about. But either way, if the steps that you use every time is, okay, the first thing I do is I, sharpen the whole thing, and then I go in, and I particularly like to add chromatic aberration. Note, I don't, but, if you did. So you can zoom into 100%, you can kind of find the chromatic aberration that you like, right? That's giving us, I don't know what kind of fringing it is. It doesn't matter, right? Blue, yellow, however you want to get it so that you get the chromatic aberration that you like. I'm going to give it a whole bunch so that we can see it. Okay. There we go. Nice and drastic. And then you can say okay, because that's how I want all of my images to look. And then you add Gaussian noise at 1% or whatever else it is, right? Like, as opposed to going through and doing that every time, the next time you do it, if you save it, and let's say at the end of the day you also, what's another thing that some people do at the end of an image? Let's say you kind of like neutralize your colors, right, using like a gray picker. So you say like that should be gray, and you usually find that you like that to be like 50%, something like that. Let's get to 50, whatever it might be. And then then you can say stop, and you can add in saving, right? All kinds of, like, if you need to save in 8 bits and 2K, and you can add all of those things in. I usually do them through different things in Bridge at the end of a project. But at that point, you know, like, however long that took me, a couple of minutes, probably. I don't know, you guys can check the clock. We can do that whole thing again in, you know, what was that, 6 seconds, maybe, right? And I'm off having a beer a couple minutes early. You know what I'm saying? And if you got 30 images, and they're all, right, like for any given project, you're probably sharpening and adding the same amount of noise, and if you're adding any last minute grade effects, that's probably all at the end. Redoing it every time is a pain in the ass. We just saved a couple minutes. So that's the idea. Milan, I've never actually used cryptomats, and I don't think that FStorm currently supports them. Multimats are super simple to use, relatively simple to use. Everyone loves Cryptomat, but I've just never. I'm gonna check. I don't think Cryptomat is supported by FStorm. Maybe it is. You might be able to. I'll look into it. If it's easier than what I'm currently doing, I'll definitely look into it. But it's such like a little process. Okay, guys, that went on a bit longer. I hope it made sense. I feel like we got a little bit sidetracked on a few things. But hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you got an idea, like anything you can do. And I think that this is one of the reasons that I'm such a big proponent of like learning some like very base level scripting. Because you can also, if you know just a little bit of scripting, like just basically enough not to be scared of it, you can do the same type of things in Max. To record macros, if there's like a set of things that you do all the time and it's like 12 button presses or even 3 button presses, if it's something that you do a couple, you know, dozen times a day, that time really adds up. And finding little things like this that'll take something that used to take you, you know, a minute down to 5 seconds is something that is going to, you know, over time exponentially help you out, especially as you keep adding these. Lewis, I might hit you up on Cryptomat. Guys, I need to let you in on a little secret here. My planning happens, generally speaking, the night before each episode. Generally speaking. About the time that you see a post go up that says this is what we're going to be doing tomorrow, that's usually when I've thought of it. And I hope that that changes in the future, but not until this current project finishes, which any moment now. We're getting there. We're so close. I'm not going to get into computer complaints, but okay. Guys, thank you for being here. I hope that was helpful. I hope that it encourages you to be efficient and to learn some new things that will speed up your workflow, because the less time you spend repeating yourself, the more time you can spend making things awesome. Tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, we have Patrick here, which I am super excited about. We don't know what we're going to do yet. Leave a comment or send me a DM or send Patrick a DM. We're trying to figure it out. But Patrick's going to be back, and we're going to be chatting and having a beer and talking about or doing something. That's what I can promise you. If you have any images you want me to paint over, please send them to mike@jorky.com or hit me up on DM somewhere, and I will... I'll basically just repeat that email address back to you. But we'll be doing a Paint Over Friday on Friday. And last bit of news. The light's not really on. I'm not sure what you guys can see all the way through, but last little update is We have a mountain of box. Oh, my desk is kind of blocking it. We have a mountain of boxes over there, and the world's largest computer case, or what seems like the world's largest computer case. So building the new computer is going to start soon. Hopefully that means my computer no longer crashes at random. All right, I'm back to work. Guys, be well, take care of one another, and make some cool stuff efficiently and beautifully. Cheers to you all. Thank you for being here, and talk to you soon. I wanted to take a sip while it was boop and beeps time. It just keeps getting more and more awkward. All right. Boo.